Let's bring in Gordon Griffin, who was American ambassador to Canada during the Clinton administration. Ambassador Griffin, good to see you. And I want to start with the president's speech itself. He says we're at an inflection point. That was actually the first point he made. What do you make of Joe Biden's message connecting the Middle East to the war in Ukraine?
I thought his message last night was inspirational. The compelling part of the way he delivered a very profound lesson and message to the American public was he spoke with personal conviction. I've seen an awful lot of political leaders make statements and speeches over the years, but you could tell the intensity with which President Biden feels this in his bones. And so he wasn't just reading a speech, he was delivering a sermon.
Okay, now as part of that, we did hear the president say he wants $105 billion, not just for Israel, not just for Ukraine, but also for border security and also measures that counter China. Now, of course, that request is coming without any speaker as we talk today. So what are the chances that this package is actually going to get passed in any kind of timely fashion?
I think it'll get passed in a fashion and a time frame that's sufficient to be effective. I think, and listen, what do I know? The House of Representatives has demonstrated that they could be historically inept and disorganized, but I trust and hope that they will get that straightened out pretty quickly. Some of the aid that's needed, particularly for Israel and in some measure for Ukraine, can be sent without further congressional action. But to get to the levels that he's described in this message to Congress now, there's no doubt it takes congressional action. The Senate will pass it, I think, with some deliberate speed. And I do think that by sometime next week, we'll be in a position to get the House to pass it. Importantly, it's got border security and China related aspects to it, to address some of the conservatives in the House, to try and get enough in there that would interest them that they will proceed to vote for this. Because, as you know, there's been some reticence expressed by some in the House of Representatives to further fund Ukraine.
Right. And there is, as you say, that resistance to more aid for Ukraine. And there's also been opposition, not just on Capitol Hill, but elsewhere, about President Biden's strong support for Israel. Let's go back to the speech. How well do you think he made his case to Americans to try and bridge some of these divisions?
Well, I think he made the case in a very compelling way. How many people, one, were watching and two, are open-minded is another question. But I think he did as good a job as you could humanly do. And as I say, having watched an awful lot of big speeches by major leaders in the United States, this goes up very near the top of speeches that I have seen. So I think it made a difference. I think his speech right after the attack in southern Israel made a difference. I think his trip to Israel made a difference. He is showing tremendous political courage and leadership on the world stage, and doing the kinds of things that at least I would hope the United States would do to lead the free world.
Now, the president, throughout the week, not just last night, he was in Israel earlier, as you say, continuing to urge the Israeli government to learn from the American 9/11 experience, not to be, in his words, blinded by rage. Should he be more forceful about the death toll in Gaza and the humanitarian situation there?
Well, I guess I'll leave that judgment of balance to him. He's in the seat. He's the one that has the information. He is clearly trying to balance our unequivocal support for Israel and our unequivocal rejection of the kind of terror and atrocities committed by the Hamas terrorists with the maintaining the potential for some political resolution in the long run of the stress in that region. And as you know, he was bringing the potential of a Saudi Arabia-Israel deal to the table. No one else has done that. And I think part of the reason we saw this series of atrocities was the fear of some of these radical groups in the Middle East that Biden was actually going to create the kind of coalition that could give us peace for a long time.
Okay, we have just a moment left, and I want to pick your diplomatic brain about Canada before you leave. Of course, the U.S. is lining up behind Israel on the evidence about this week's hospital bombing in Gaza. Canada has not yet done so publicly. The Prime Minister says he wants to be careful before reaching a conclusion. What's your reaction to how Canada has been responding this week and throughout this crisis?
Well, I agree with the proposition of being careful, but events are transpiring pretty quickly, and you don't have a luxury of thinking about it for too long. Presumably, he's getting the benefit of Canadian intelligence, and the Canadian intelligence services are among the top in the world, so the desire to get that information makes sense to me. It's reasonable, but I do think in the case of the United States, at least, our intelligence services are pretty confident. It's clear from what the president had to say. And I think we have been decisive in the face of rapidly changing events. And if the bad guys don't see resolution in our approach, I fear it invites further tragedy.
Ambassador Gordon Griffin, really appreciate your thoughts on all this. Thank you.
Thank you.